Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagoshnik. Thank you so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, places like Cover 32 and Cold Omaha and Zone Coverage. And our useful human has a little announcement to make. Arif, what do you got?
Little
announcement.
I'm super happy, excited, stoked to announce that I'm joining The Athletic as a staff writer to cover the Vikings, which is the coolest thing. I'm a full-time employee and all that. That's where you can find my work from here on out. Obviously, all my stuff that's been at zonecoverage.com, you can still find at zonecoverage.com. And I will still be doing this podcast. I'll still be doing the Football Machine podcast. I've got a 99% chance that I'll be still doing the Football Machine podcasts. Talks could break down.
These things happen. You might have to have your guaranteed money taken away if you go to Andy's head too many times.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So now I will be shilling for you to buy an Athletic subscription. If you go to theathletic.com/Vikings expansion, you'll get a 30% off ability to buy an Athletic subscription, and that should cover you for the year. So go and do that. Support my work. Support the work of John Krasinski and Chad Graff, who both do really just phenomenal stuff when covering the Vikings. Recently, for example, John Krasinski wrote this phenomenal piece about Linval Joseph and recovering from being shot. And Chad wrote 2 oral histories. One was the oral history of the Vikings acquiring Randy Moss, which is phenomenal. And the second is an oral history of the Richie Incognito debacle, which is hilarious. So, yeah.
Which ended with Richie Incognito, throwing $1,000 or something at the Mike Zimmer Foundation. That made it better. Right. I gave you $1,000. Give me a call.
I really like the idea that money is a not an asshole filter. Now I have given money to charity, and because ethics is a scale on which people balance things, I am good now.
I know I bombed a country. I know what I did was wrong. How about I bring some UNICEF pennies over here, and we make this right?
Oh my God! Now you're using the Vikings language. We'll make this right.
So that's awesome. That is really cool. Arif is going to be writing for The Athletic, so please check that out. As a result, we will be doing a small amount of shilling and just mentioning that you can find his stuff behind the paywall rather of The Athletic. But that is really cool, and as a result, there are a few more options for Norse code ideas to kind of move forward in the future. So that should be very cool. So we're breaking this at the same time. We're actually releasing this episode basically at the same time that the announcement's going out. Are you preparing some form of a victory cake for 7 a.m.?
That's maybe not the most appropriate breakfast.
You're saying that you're going to be sleeping, this evening? I can't. That you're not going to already be awake.
Well, okay. So, but I tend to eat food items at the appropriate time of the day. It's not like I can only have breakfast an hour after I wake up. It's it's breakfast-ish time to have a waffle. It's more like that.
I lived with a writer for a while, and that was never the case.
I'm lying. But I'm still probably not having a cake at 7 a.m.
If it is going to be a cake, it's going to be a pancake, or it's going to be a donut.
I actually had a waffle 2 nights ago for dinner, so oops.
Well, that's Brenner, and that's fine. That no one's gonna persecute you for having Brenner. In fact, a lot of people enjoy Brenner for dinner. Not an issue. But we've spent a fair amount of time on this. But again, congratulations to Arif. This is really great news, and it's really great news for the show because one of our concerns was the ability to continue doing Norse code for you guys, and that is not going to be a problem. Nor does it sound like it may be a problem for the machine if you enjoy the machine. So kudos to you. This is really cool stuff. We're speaking on behalf of the fans. We're all really excited for this this opportunity for you. So this is pretty cool. Moving on, just a couple of quick notes before we get started. If you enjoy Norse Code and would like to donate to the show, you can do so in one of two different ways. You can go to paypal.me/NorseCode, or you can go to patreon.com/NorseCode, and you can donate there. Patreon is more of a monthly subscription, so you can do any amount you want per month, $1, $3.50 per month to help keep the lights on. Whatever you're feeling comfortable with. So, before we start, a couple of quick donations came in. One from Brian Jellerson, and we are going to be answering your email via the mailbag in just a little bit. Samuel Ward gives a PayPal donation, and normally we don't actually list the description, but we're going to give him this right here. It's $23, and he says, "This is $1 for every sack Daniil Hunter is going to get. Thanks for being my favorite podcast." Thank you, Samuel Ward. And the third PayPal donation is from Chris Landwehr. No note, but again, thanks, Chris. We really do appreciate it. So again, if you'd like to donate, you're more than welcome to do so there. It helps keep the lights on, helps keep us ad-free, and we enjoy this aspect of it. We really enjoy kind of getting money from the fans as opposed to trying to sneak in advertisements here and talk about Dollar Shave Club and MeUndies and all that. So again, thank you guys so much. Also, just a quick note, the fantasy football pool is closed, and I forget if you get emails that are sent to the Norse Code podcast account to your email, but we were inundated with requests to join the worst.
Yeah, people were super excited to join this awful soul-crushing league.
To a person, it was good luck, but you know what you're getting into. Your soul is on the line here.
Yeah, right. Like I don't want to like put my faith that like Randy Bullock is 100% on extra points this year or whoever, right?
Yeah. So I think it's safe to say we've got over 100 names that have been sent in.
Wow.
That is up from the last 2 years. So this is really cool.
It is super up. What?
This is insane. I am looking forward to hopefully getting my first win for the season, which I did not accomplish last year, thanks to
James Hugh Jackson Pagachnik. Yeah,
we're not changing course. We're doubling down. My guys.
When are you jumping into Lake Erie, James? That's what the fans want to know.
The fans want to know, when am I going to jump into Lake Erie? I think that a better usage of my time would be to purify myself in the waters of Lake Minnetonka, which I might try to do this weekend. We'll see. But so again, thanks to everyone who has applied. We may, because of the sheer number of people who are interested, we may expand this. We'll see.
Maybe. Yeah.
But for right now, it's for 10 names. And Arif and I are looking forward to repeating as the Norse Code champions.
Because we as a group won.
Yeah, we as a group. Dusty was the one who had access to the account. But really, a victory for one of us is a victory for all of us, right?
Right, yeah, because we're team players here at Norse Code.
Yes. The guy who's not on the show anymore. We're taking credit for his victory. It's great. Why would it be anything but? Also, before we start the official show, we want to give a shout out to the Chicago Tribune on Twitter.
Beautiful. It's beautiful.
The Chicago Tribune, in promoting one of their pieces talking about the quarterback hit rule, has a fantastic tweet that we will have in the show notes for you. And the text of the tweet includes that implementation of a new NFL rule sparked by an incident last season involving Danica Patrick's boyfriend came up for the first time this season during a Minnesota Vikings preseason game. And there's this great picture of mustachioed Aaron Rodgers.
It's great.
I want to like this thing from space. Right. I just want to hit this so hard.
It's so good. Like, we were talking about like creating phantom accounts to like this particular tweet more.
I just want to make so many bots. Right.
So like I enjoy kind of the reversal for like my crazy SJW reasons or whatever. Because it's when women do well, very often it's like the wife of Zach Ertz like won the World Cup, and you're like, what? You mean Julie Ertz won the World Cup? That's great. Like,
exactly.
And so there's that, which is great. I understand, like, sometimes it's like the only reason the story is notable is because it's related to someone you know, and they have, like, I get that. But I mean, this is just, and also, like, Danica Patrick is, like, famous in her own right. So it makes perfect sense in every like conception of it. And I love it. And also, people in Chicago, they probably like Danica Patrick more than they like Aaron Rodgers. So really, it was a positively worded headline.
It had nothing to do with the trolling aspect of that at all. No.
Well, I mean, they're professionals. They're a newspaper, James.
Whoever is in charge of that, like, social media account for the Chicago Tribune, kudos to you. That was fantastic. On to slightly less happy news. The Vikings struggled against the Jags on Saturday. It was not a pretty game, to put it mildly. The Vikings struggled in a lot of the aspects of the game. Defense was in a bend, not break, but the special teams looked rough, especially at the last punt return of the game. I guess the first thing that I want to mention is the play of Kirk Cousins. And obviously Vikings Twitter is its own evil monster machine and pumps out the most ridiculous takes that it could possibly pump out. But people are freaking out a bit over Cousins. And we had a suggestion that maybe it wasn't that he was, maybe it's because he was kind of choosing his targets differently, trying to ignore certain receivers in order to try to force throws in. What do you think about this take and the play of Kirk Cousins in the Jags game?
Yeah, I don't think that's actually a super accurate assessment of Cousins' play. First, I don't think he's wired like that as a quarterback. I think he's a very sort of process-oriented quarterback, which is actually one of the problems I have that caps his ceiling, is that he very often won't use or doesn't have, either case it's the same thing, intuition in order to better determine sort of like, hey, this is a good matchup. Let's take advantage of this. This is the pre-snap read. This is the defense. This person should be open. I'll check on that. They are. I'll throw. And it's not much like, hey, Diggs is on, Richard Sherman, great cornerback, but it's a poor matchup because of his quickness. I'll keep an eye on that, whatever. It's very left side, right side, it's a cover 2, cover 3. They're going to run a post if it's a cover 2. They're going to run, a comeback if it's cover 3 or something along those lines. And then he'll just do that. So I don't think that's what he did in this game, because that's not kind of how he is as a quarterback. But also, if you kind of rewatch the game, you'll note that Diggs was fairly well covered for a lot of the game. And this is not an indictment of Diggs, of course, but it made sense for Cousins to make a lot of the decisions that he made. The issue was kind of either, the decision was just it started from a bad foundation because he kind of read the defense incorrectly, or his accuracy / ball placement / even arm velocity at times was a problem. So, for example, his throw to Kyle Rudolph, correct decision. And honestly, Rudolph got both hands on it, so you could say, hey, that's a drop. But it was poor ball placement too. But there was definitely an area that he could have targeted that Rudolph probably would have caught it. So there's that. His throw to Adam Thielen that was nearly, probably should have been picked off. That was probably a bad decision, but Diggs wasn't any better of a decision. Honestly, Treadwell might have been the best decision on that one, which is kind of a weird thing for me personally to say, but also just a weird thing to say in general. But his decisions were not designed to say, oh, hey, I want to break this habit of always targeting Stephon Diggs. He was definitely more a product of just kind of what he was seeing on the field. And unfortunately, he just had a really poor game. He especially struggled under pressure. He obviously had difficulty converting third downs. The Vikings, throughout the course of the game, couldn't convert a third down. I think they were 0 for 12 or 0 for 14 or something embarrassing like that. Inaccurate, unusual ball placement, rushed process, and poor decisions. But I don't think it was because of an intentional kind of presupposition that he should kind of avoid Diggs if he can.
There's the story of Michael Jordan when he would play and sometimes kind of get bored of what he was doing, and I realize I'm making a odd
just
comparison.
be careful here.
I'm not referring to Kirk Cousins as like the NFL version of Michael Jordan. But what I am saying is that sometimes Michael Jordan would be having a bit of an off night or just not really feeling it. And he would need something to, like a game to play in order to kind of like get into it. And if he was like, okay, I'm going to be passing this one. I'm going to be trying to avoid Steve Kerr this time, and just like trying to make it like a mini game out of what he's doing, trying to like get better by avoiding people or something like that. So while it could have been some form of possible, it's an odd thing to do during your second preseason game.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's something that's best left for practices.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I understand that preseason is meant to be practice, but it's a kind of a different style of practice where you are just attempting to kind of execute and seeing what's possible, versus like intentionally put blinders on yourself, because I mean, it just you're kind of letting the rest of the offense down. They only have a certain number of opportunities, and those opportunities are defined by, what you're able to do. So the Vikings don't get red zone reps. The Vikings don't get running reps in certain situations. And that's because you're intentionally avoiding Stephon Diggs. That's like a weird way to approach it. And that's not how preseason should go, because it replicates a game. In practices, you can just create the situation and practice that. In preseason, situations emerge, and you should give your teammates an opportunity. That's ridiculous. Yeah.
Speaking of practice, obviously this last week had two shared practices between the Vikings and the Jags. And as anyone who has watched episodes of Hard Knocks, where they have shared practices go, things get a little weird in the game. It seems to happen. I don't know if it's just the over familiarity with the team as a result of actually playing them in practice or what. But for whatever reason, there's just a little bit of kind of like a skittishness or something when you're actually playing them in the actual game. And there was a near sack on Bortles, and that was the first thought I had, is when the defender, whose name is escaping me for some reason, ran up to Bortles while he still had the ball, and it almost seemed like he came to a full stop while Bortles still had the ball, like he had almost forgotten. I actually
do recall this. I kind of wish I remember the name of the defender, because I almost tweeted something out.
Yeah.
And then I saw the replay. Just because it's like a weird thing to tweet. If you tweet out a normal observation, you can just kind of let it fire. And if you're wrong, you're like, well, I mean, in fairness, This is what normally happens. But this is a weird thing. So I watched the replay, and on the replay, which is from a different camera angle, it didn't actually look like that. So I just kind of held back. But I noticed the same thing as you did. And I was wondering, maybe it's not because of the joint practices, although I just hadn't considered that. So you might be right. I thought it was maybe because of how weird the NFL has been calling things. A suspicion which was later confirmed. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But I thought it was because they saw Bortles begin to release, and they didn't want to be called for roughness or roughing the passer. But that's also another potential interpretation. Or it could just be that other camera angle kind of showed the truth. It was kind of an awkward angle that he had to attack at, which you couldn't kind of see on initial viewing. But I don't know. Maybe that was part of it. The thing about joint practices, Cousins kind of himself, he said it, is that with joint practices leading up to a game, you get the perfect scout team. It's the defense that you're actually playing, and the defense, obviously, they get the actual offense that they're playing. And whoever can kind of best take advantage of learning about the opposing team, which in both cases here seems to be the defense, kind of emerges as a surprisingly efficient team, because they kind of know what to expect, not just from schemes and stuff like that, but also from tendencies and techniques that you can pin down and counter and stuff like that.
Yeah, for whatever reason, that play just stuck out to me the most out of anything other than the sack that wasn't throughout the game. And maybe it was the camera angle, but boy, it really just appeared.
No, I know what you're talking about. That's what it looked like.
Yeah, it really just appeared like somebody not playing till, if we're going to be doing the whole Stephon Diggs, not playing until the clock hits 0. Like, it's like not actually completing the play, because you see that during a regular, and, preseason to regular season, you see that in a regular season, that is a hit 10 times out of 10.
Yeah, no, for sure.
That's not even a question. And whether it gets called or not is beside the point. That is a hit 10 times out of 10. So just seeing that, you see him run up, you have an expectation. And the expectation isn't for the defender to come to like a complete stop. But the game was filled with things like that. And Latavius Murray, who hasn't exactly had a major fumble problem, ended up having 2 really weird fumbles.
Yeah. So he's had I think Courtney Cronin tweeted it out, 4 fumbles in his career. And there were moments, kind of before the Vikings where he was a bell cow back and he would get a ton of carries. And so he's got a really low fumble rate. So yeah, that was unusual. I think it was 2 fumbles within the span of 5 carries. One obviously were recovered by the Vikings. The other one recovered by the Jaguars.
Adrian Peterson is just sitting there going, those are rookie numbers, boy. You got to pump up those numbers.
You got to pump up those numbers. I guess I wouldn't worry too much about it. That just kind of happens sometimes. I remember Jerick McKinnon didn't fumble for 3 years for the Vikings. And then I wrote an article. I was like, hey, I don't know how long this will last. He fumbled a ton, more than any other running back in the past 3 draft classes. He fumbled more than any running back ever in college. And, he's a quarterback, right? So you'd expect, a lot of those come on sacks. Or quarterbacks have super high fumble rates and all that. But really he kind of wasn't. He was an option quarterback. So I was like, this should probably go up. Maybe not as much as it was in college. Maybe the Vikings have fixed his carry technique. Maybe a lot of this has to do with quarterbacks. But this is super high. And then the next game he fumbled twice. And I was like, okay, weird.
Proving, of course, that Arif is the cause of all of these problems and is the angel of death.
And I was like, okay, so maybe we shouldn't expect him to fumble quite as often as he did last week. I just want to put that it was like that. And, as the season continued, he fumbled a couple more times. But after that point, it actually wasn't a significant problem. But because people remember it happening twice in that game, they thought it was a huge problem for the rest of the season. And then next season, you magically fixed it or something, I guess.
Some form of confirmation bias or something like that.
Right. Yeah. So I wouldn't be too worried about this. This is a thing that happens.
So the defense looked halfway decent. There was that fantastic interception early. It's been said of Bortles, and I believe it was on Twitter, that Bortles does everything so well. He's so great at everything except throwing the ball.
Yeah, I actually saw a couple of versions of that tweet and retweeted one of them, but it's kind of true. I mean, he moves really well in the pocket.
He does. He even scrambles well.
Yeah, he scrambles well. He's a better athlete than you'd expect, just kind of looking at him. And I don't mean that he's white. I mean that he looks like he's a balding dad, you don't expect that dude to be running wind sprints a lot. And he's a good runner, and he's got vision. He can carry. He's got good ball handling in play action situations. He does all of these small things really well. He can even look off safeties, and then he throws the ball, and
that's where the problems start.
Right. There was another set of dropped interceptions for the Vikings, which they had 5 of them in camp, just against Blake Bortles in the 2 days, and then they had 2 on one play. And then Harrison Smith recovered one. Unfortunately, his efforts were in vain because of course Latavius Murray fumbles. But Bortles was not good.
Here's an interesting comparison.
When you point that out, I saw Jaguars fans being he was better than Kirk Cousins was, and it's well, yeah, that's not your bar, is it? Cousins' performance in this game is not the standard. The standard is the standard.
You really should be demanding excellence of your quarterback. I'm just saying, right. And your offensive line. Frankly, here, I have a question for you, and maybe this can kind of put this into context. Who do you believe is the better thrower, the better passer? Tavares Jackson or Blake Bortles?
Jesus. You can't ignore the jump passes.
Well, that ends up being a problem, yes, when you have to nail down Tavares' foot onto the field to keep him from jumping. But
I guess if you exclude like decision making, which I mean, Bortles is not like a king got it. Like, I mean, both interceptions were also bad decisions, not just inaccurate throws. Or both should have been interceptions. So he's not like a great decision maker, but like Tavares, also not a great decision maker. But if you throw it out, let's say they're equally good decision makers and they're just like, really, they're just trying to execute this decision they've made to throw the ball. I think Tavares Jackson. That one's tough. It's not like I'm like choosing between like literally anyone and Tim Tebow.
Well, no, I was when I was watching Bortles, that was kind of my thought, is that I'm trying to think of like a Vikings equivalent of what I'm seeing, because Jackson, while not the greatest quarterback, had some athletic strengths and was fairly quick and would be able to stay upright a lot of the time. Was not the most accurate passer, made a lot of terrible decisions under center, but it's almost like he's a more talented version of Tavares Jackson, and that he's not. I don't know if he's a better passer or not. I don't know if his form is necessarily better. I haven't actually done the research on that, but it does seem somewhat comparable between the two.
Yeah, the weird thing about Bortles is that he's been reworking his throwing motion every year. Like, so after his rookie year, he was
often.
Like, yeah,
they want him to succeed so badly.
Yeah, he was like, my problem was the throwing motion, and it's like, well, yeah, I guess, sure, fine. So he like revamps it, like they release like videos or at least photos of his arm slot, and in the first preseason game he showcases it and it looks good, and then it just kind of crumbles, right? Because it's like one of the hardest things to do in football is like after you've thrown the ball like 15,000 times in your life, now you're gonna do it a bunch of doing it 100 times is not going to overcome the 15,000 attempts worth of muscle memory that you've created. So, his throwing motion's not great. I would say it's still it's actually bad. I would say it's still better than Jackson's, and I would also say it has improved. Not that that's resulted in like fewer interceptions or anything, but that's cool.
I'm just reminding myself of the like Chris Collinsworth little graphic he would do on Sundays, kind of showing the path of the ball when when the quarterback be throwing.
I love that. That's cool.
Yeah, that's always really interesting to see, kind of like comparing quarterbacks and their release time and everything. But boy, Bortles under center would still scare the crap out of me. So let's talk about the first team and how they ended up doing. This was not they played for a little while out there, and it just didn't look like they were clicking. What happened out there?
Well, defensively they did fine except on just a couple of plays, but offensively, I would start with the fact that 4 of the offensive linemen that were playing are not the 4 offensive linemen that they expected to start with for the season, and 3 of them will be back, right? If you count Rashad Hill as a starting offensive lineman, and maybe you don't, maybe you want it to be Brian O'Neill, in which case I still don't think he was playing. I think it was Aviante Collins, but Cornelius Edison at center, who has been like the best one, just weird because he's like the 3rd string sort of tight end, and then Tom Compton and Danny Isidora. And then Riley Arif was the only starting tackle. And if he's struggling, that means everyone's struggling, except apparently Cornelius Edison. And he was struggling. So everyone was struggling. And so there was pressure constantly at Cousins' feet. That said, and this is kind of a thing where I remember talking about this with Bridgewater and Ponder, is that if they're under pressure a lot and that can help explain a poor performance, you still need to account for like it's not an excuse. It just changes what your expectation should be. So if you're under pressure a lot, it's okay that you're not as good of a passer than when you're kept clean, and you can still be a good quarterback under those circumstances. But there's a threshold at which it's like, this is bad even for someone who's under pressure. Ponder kind of hit that threshold a lot. And Bridgewater's a good example of someone who was under pressure a lot but performed well relative to the amount of pressure he was seeing. And so, with all that in mind, Cousins, I thought, was under pressure a lot, and that only provides some of the explanation for how poor that offense was. He was just playing poorly a lot. We also saw, not great plays from the receivers. We saw a half drop from Kyle Rudolph. We saw Thielen. He should have done a better job competing for that interception. We saw, I wouldn't say any sloppy routes or anything like that, but they did have difficulty getting open, which, kind of extended Kirk's time in the pocket. We saw a lot of stuff. There was a play fake that wasn't executed well enough, or Yannick Ngakoue just was smart enough to figure out what was going on, and it resulted in a sack. And the thing is, it was kind of the exact same play that Latavius Murray fumbled on, except it was play action instead of a run. So everyone should have been doing the exact same thing on that play as they had during the Latavius Murray run, and that should include Ngakoue to think, hey, this is a run again. But Cousins was left to just get destroyed. And those are just things that happen. That's a play design problem. That's not Cousins' fault. That's not anyone's fault but Yannick Ngakoue and maybe the play caller and maybe kind of whoever maybe gave it up, that it wasn't play action, like a guard or something. But yeah, I wouldn't blame Cousins for that. And I wouldn't blame the Vikings for not having an offensive lineman in front of Cousins, because that's like a weird thing to do on play action that doesn't happen. So, yeah, the play design was fine. It was more the fact that he was recognized. It's a lot of things kind of contribute to this. Latavius Murray, I thought, looked pretty good. He, of course, I think he finished with like under 2 yards a carry, so it's like very difficult for me to be like, yeah, he was like monstrous, right? But I thought he looked fine given kind of what was ahead of him. Danny Isidora didn't do a very good job at the second level. Tom Compton did a poor job pass protecting. The first team offense just had all kinds of struggles.
And of course, if we're going to take a good look at this game, we have to take a look at the I would say the biggest play of the game, even though it wasn't the scoring play, in the very, very poor punt return, or the punt special teams, trying to stop Jacksonville from returning it to like the 5. And this is the second week in a row where this has happened. And as they had said on the broadcast, like, this is where people make the team. Like, you make the team and you go on special teams, and then you work hard enough and you end up finding your way onto your actual position. But like, do these people just not want to join the Vikings? Because I understand the history. We've covered the team for years. But this is where you join the team. This is where you make your money.
Yeah, I think one of these 2 punts was called back, but there were 2 big returns, right? One at the end of the fourth quarter that counted, or one in the fourth quarter that counted, and one in the second quarter that may not have counted. I don't quite remember. But it was just really poor punt coverage, an enormous return. And the questions you can ask about this are how much is attributable to the punter, and that's a question of hang time and distance. In both situations, I don't think either are on the punter, although in the one in the fourth quarter, I would say, maybe more hang time would have been better, but I don't think either of those are really about Ryan Quigley. It's really about the coverage in this case. In the first one, it was our old pal, Holton Hill, who did such a poor job against Denver, who I think made the first bigger mistake in punt return coverage. We also saw, would have been nice to see the linebacker, Brett Taylor, do a little bit of a better job. But that was a big problem. And then we saw Trey Matthews mess up in holding his lane assignment. In the second one, Trey Matthews was kind of the first one to mess up. So that's kind of, you got to watch out for him. And there's one other player. I don't think it was Brett Taylor. It might have been Mike Needham, a 40 series linebacker, who also kind of screwed it up. Also, Ryan Quigley fake attempted to tackle. I'm not going to hold that against him. But that didn't help, I guess. But yeah, it's a huge problem. People left their lanes. It's a surprising problem for a Mike Prefer coach team. Traditionally, Prefer teams don't do a great job punting the ball, but they do a really great job in punt coverage, in kickoff coverage, and in returning kickoffs. That was unusual. And I think it kind of solidifies potentially Marcus Sherrill's spot on the roster, because he's not only, a top 3 punt returner, he's also one of the better or best punt gunners in the league. He's fantastic at it. And the Vikings really value that sort of thing. So when we're kind of crafting our rosters, one of the things we have to think about is like, Holton Hill looked really good in mini camp. He looked really good kind of early on in training camp. He's faded a little bit. He came back a little bit. But they're not going to reserve bottom of the roster spots for someone who just not only can perform in special teams, but will be a liability if they're there on special teams. And 1 week it's like we'll have to watch out for it. 2 weeks it becomes a serious concern, and then we have to kind of openly question, like, is Holton Hill going to make the roster above someone like Horace Richardson, who has looked good. He hasn't made significant mistakes to my knowledge on special teams. He knows the defense better. Hill has a lot of potential. He's supposed to be this potentially 3rd round pick or something like that. But he's just not doing what he's supposed to do on special teams. And you've got, 23 starters or something like that, depending on how you treat your nickel and will linebackers and your 3rd receiver and stuff like that. You got 23, 24 people who are expected to contribute from scrimmage. And your game day roster, 46 people, 3 of them are specialists, and that gives you about 20 people with whom you can craft a special teams unit around. And those are your depth players. And so there's not very much room for just depth players. So yeah, it's a huge problem. And the Vikings, I think, will kind of evaluate their cutdown days based off of the special teams problem, because some players are performing really well, right? Like Marcus Sherrill's, and Antoine Williams, right, is performing well in special teams. But some people aren't performing well, and they kind of want to keep the players that will perform well.
It's too bad. For a moment there, I was actually pining for the days of when we had made Cordell Patterson a gunner.
He was pretty good.
He was so good. He's the fastest guy on that field. It was one of the best tackles on a punt return I've ever seen in my entire life.
Destroyed him. Kind of reminded me of Palomalu's punt return.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Okay. Yeah. Whew, boy. That one's a highlight reel.
No, that was like Angel of Death. Like, I'm sorry, you're not going anywhere. You might actually be going negative yards on this one, because it's going to look like you're going to try to move forward. You will fail.
Yeah.
The big story coming out of the game, I feel, was not the play of the first team. It was not necessarily the play of Latavius Murray or anybody like that. It was the sack that wasn't, and the penalties that have been happening as a result of these what look to be legal tackles. Zimmer was very upset at the call. However, he said that he after reviewing it, he sees where the league might have had a point. I don't think he believes that thing he said afterwards. Yeah, I kind of got that feeling too. I think it was one of those like the league. Was it? You don't want to like get fined by the league for criticizing the refs. Yeah, that sort of thing. Yeah. I have a theory on how this all is going to end up playing out, and I just kind of want this like on record. Do you remember when the obviously you remember when we had the wonderful experience of the replacement refs, and how it seemed like it was going to end up dragging on until finally, in a highly publicized Monday Night Football game, after a weekend of just terrible officiating, including a Vikings 49ers game where the 49ers got like 2 extra timeouts. Yeah, they had 5 timeouts and a half. Yeah. So, but... Which was the third worst officiated game that day. Yeah. Just want to be clear. It might have been 4th. But everything, including like all arguments and every discussion, changed after the Seahawks Green Bay game with the catch at the very end of the game, which was a catch, wasn't a catch, might not have even been a toss. But that really crystallized everything as to what needed to be done, what needed to be changed. I have a feeling this isn't going to end up this isn't going to be like looked at seriously or kind of formatted properly or given proper instruction until the regular season starts. Until some Sunday night game or some Monday night game happens and something stupid happens as a result of it. A sack or a hit that should clearly be a sack that wasn't, or that ended up getting called back as a penalty that had nothing wrong. The defender couldn't do anything about it and ends up causing the outcome of some, let's say, New England game.
Right. I think there's something to that, but I also want to put out there, I've seen a couple of stories. Kelmer Seifert over at ESPN has advanced this idea, and I've seen references to this being kind of a factual claim, which is that the refs are calling this a lot in the preseason so that they'll have a lot of, I guess, film to review, like a very Leslie Frazier kind of thing, a lot of film to review of what calls are acceptable and fall under the purview of this rule and what calls are not. And then also during the regular season, New York will be able to overturn calls in the field to this effect. So they might just be calling things a lot. The thing is, this sack is not a part of a lot of the discussions that are kind of surrounding this, which is the helmet rule, which is my understanding the things that they're calling to get reviewed. I thought really only applied to the helmet rule and should not apply to the sack. And maybe it was just a bad call. I actually don't think this is the correct call in the field, even with a new point of emphasis about driving into the quarterback, because that only applies when the quarterback is defenseless. And the quarterback is only defenseless the moment after he throws, not in the moment of throwing, not while he's still held onto the ball, which is what happened here. He's only defenseless after he releases the ball. And even then, the defender gets a step. And only a step, which is, dumb. They should get a step and a half. But they get a step. And in this case, he had not thrown the ball, and they didn't call unnecessary roughness, right? They didn't call, the helmet rule. They called roughing the passer, which is what this new emphasis, the Aaron Rodgers rule, which is what this new emphasis is meant to cover. When quarterbacks release the ball, it now, even within that one step after they release the ball, if you drive your shoulder down into the quarterback and you drive your weight onto the quarterback in a manner that's, I guess, unnecessary or something, then that should be roughing the passer. But he didn't do any of that. And so there's a lot of people who there are people who are like, this shouldn't have been a penalty. And then there's people responding to it saying, but he drove his weight into the quarterback, which no, he didn't. He put his knee on the ground. He had 2 feet and a knee on the ground at the moment of the fulcrum moment when the quarterback begins to fall over. Right. So it's very clear he's not doing it. Right. But there's like a moment where his feet lift off the ground because he has now also fallen, duh. But his weight's not on the quarterback. Half of it's off the quarterback. His knee is still on the ground. And he slides off the quarterback. He never drives in. There's a moment where if you're reading into it, you can be like, yeah, he drove into the quarterback. He doesn't. But more importantly, the quarterback still has the ball. And so the new rule of emphasis should not matter. It's weird. And I talked to footballzebras.com, which, they're a group of referees and former referees.
And definitely worth a follow if you're not already.
Yeah. Oh, my God. They're amazing. They're incredible. They're worth following, worth checking out their website every couple of weeks and getting kind of an update on what's happening. They're great. And, they agreed with me that this is not roughing the passer. So, yeah, that was bad. I don't think this will be called during the regular season, but the perception by players might be that it will be. And that causes its own problems too. When Brian Robinson said it's been sketchy, which, it's your final year in the league, right? Say what you want. What are they going to do? Fine you? I totally agree. But most of the hysteria about, I shouldn't even call it hysteria because I think it's kind of justified. Most of the fear over the application of the helmet rule, I think is fair. We just need to temper it with the understanding that a lot of the stuff that was called in the preseason won't be called during the regular season. Not just because they call things in the preseason to set behaviors for the regular season, but because they are apparently calling a lot of things so that they can review, what is and what is not acceptable. Because I've seen a number of tackles where the helmet is to the right of the ball carrier. Because the helmet rule, I just looked it up before this podcast. The helmet rule is not if you lower your helmet and tackle. Which is how a lot of this is being called right now. It's if you lower your helmet and initiate contact with your helmet to, I guess, any part of the body now, not just the neck and shoulder / head area. That's important. And a lot of the stuff that's been called in the preseason, they've been lowering their helmet to brace themselves for impact and leading with the shoulder, which is fine. And so a lot of those won't get called during the regular season because they'll have an officials meeting after the preseason is over and say this is acceptable and should not be called. This is not acceptable. You were correct to call it. That sort of thing. So, yeah. And if that doesn't happen, like, screw it. That's such a screwed up thing. I got a DM from somebody who was like, you know what? Unpopular take. I'm not going to tweet it out. And I was like, coward. But I would. The flags suck, but seeing Brett Hundley play sucks worse. Which, that's true. But this kind of injury that occurs from the stuff that they're protecting, most of the stuff that we're complaining about doesn't impact quarterbacks because it's the helmet rule. It really only affects the Antoine Williams sack, right? So you're just kind of wrong off the bat. Sorry, Jeff. Two, that's not how this works at all. It's like that commercial. That's not how any of this works. It increases the likelihood or the chance of an injury, but taking the rule away does not eliminate the injury, right? All you're doing is reducing the percentage probability that a quarterback gets injured. And it's not necessarily Aaron Rodgers. You could be saving... I can't use A.J. McCarron anymore because he's actually injured.
Yeah, because he actually has a hairline fracture.
Right. But
which, holy crap, that game.
Right. But, like, okay, now you've successfully saved A.J. McCarron, and so? Like, from an entertainment, like, it sucks that players get injured. But from the perspective of this argument, like, the entertainment perspective, most quarterbacks are not as exciting as Aaron Rodgers. Like, I'm sorry to break it to you, Joe Flacco. But... no one cares if you have now saved Mike Glennon from a couple of games and have saved fans oh no, now Josh Rosen has to play. Like, that sounds great. And I'm not saying injure Mike Glennon to start Josh Rosen, but I'm saying the argument that this gives us more exciting football because Aaron Rodgers got injured the one time. Like, buddy, it's Tom Brady in 2008, Aaron Rodgers in 2017. And Peyton Manning in 2011 doesn't even count because his neck was just weird. Like, it wasn't even like Bernard Pollard took a hit out on him too, right?
He might have. He just didn't actually pull the trigger.
Yeah, right. And there's obviously other instances where quarterbacks have been injured and it sucks. But I mean, sometimes it's like Kevin Kolb, Michael Vick. Sucks that you got hurt, Kevin Kolb. But I mean, the Eagles are super watchable now, right? Most of the quarterbacks that you're protecting with this rule, it doesn't really matter from the perspective of this argument. Again, you don't want them injured, but it doesn't really matter from the perspective of entertainment that you're protecting them. And it does matter every single time you friggin' throw this flag, right? So I think you're reducing entertainment in the game just overall for a small percentage chance, just because it already happened, that you think it might happen again, for a small percentage chance that one of the 9 quarterbacks that are truly exciting to watch get injured. And some of those quarterbacks just aren't going to get injured. When has Phillip Rivers been injured? Cam Newton survived a car crash and played, right? Some of those quarterbacks, you might be protecting the defender, honestly. So, I think it's a bad argument because you're making the game frustrating to watch, and the game's already frustrating to watch if you're a Vikings fan, but now it's frustrating to watch for reasons you can't even Like, you're like, I can excuse the Vikings just having terrible third down luck the year after they had the best third down defense in the league. That makes sense. That's my fault for believing in them. But no one thinks that when, like, the ref, like, takes away a totally fine looking sack, right? It's just like, man, this hurts to watch, right? In a completely different way. So no, I think if this were to be called like this in the regular season, which again, I don't think it will be, it would take enjoyment way more than the small percentage chance that this will impact the likelihood that one of the fun quarterbacks to watch ends up getting hurt. So yeah, bad argument, Jeff, and I wanted to address it on a podcast, and you've been called out.
Do you feel better now?
Yeah. Wow, I didn't actually expect that.
There's actual catharsis here. Let's before we talk about injuries, and there were
also,
many of them.
Also, that's an argument for touch sacks. No one wants touch sacks.
Nobody.
But that's what that is an argument for.
Nobody.
Okay, you were saying.
Before we talk about injuries, let's talk about anyone who was really standing out in the game and who was a disappointment for their mother.
So standouts include both Mike Boone and Rock Thomas, which it's now going to be more difficult, right? Because Rock Thomas was kind of in the lead for this third running back spot after his preseason game, but he was injured for a lot of the offseason, and Mike Boone has just been looking incredible in camp. Not like Dalvin Cook incredible, but like he's a really good route runner and he's really explosive. And when he's in the open field, you can just kind of see where that quickness and explosion, that it translates. Like it's not just in the workout room. You can see it on the field, right? But you didn't get to see, he didn't perform all that well. Actually, I thought he performed all right. This is kind of like the Latavius Murray thing, where like I was defending Murray for the first couple of games that Dalvin Cook was injured. And I was like, no, it's the offensive line. And then Murray ended up having like a pretty fine season after that. I think it was the same thing with Mike Boone in that Denver game. I thought he played fine, but the blocking, wasn't really all there for him. But he played great in this game, right? But Boone in the Denver game had like one good run. In the Jacksonville game, against like a theoretically just as good defense. Again, like second and third teamers, right? So like in theory, like who knows? But, he didn't just have one good run. He had a number, right? He had a 26-yard run. He had a 19-yard run. If you took both of those away, he still averaged 4 yards a carry. He had a really good game, 91 yards on 13 carries, I think it was. And then he got a couple of receptions, I want to say. And he improved his pass protection. Not that it mattered, because I think on the play that he best demonstrated his pass protection, someone just came screaming off the edge unblocked. So, whatever, which I think was the final offensive play for the Vikings. So good job, Mike Boone. Kyle Sluter still got destroyed. Not your fault. But yeah, he improved his pass protection in diagnosis and in it looked like ability, because he actually had the best pass protection on the play that Simeon was just kind of running around for a while. Everybody kind of got through, but Boone had a cut block, and his cut block was really effective, and all that. So that's good and important for kind of what he's doing. Is Rock Thomas ahead? Probably still, because he had a pretty good game. It wasn't as good as Boone's. That's fine, because he had a phenomenal game the week before. But, I don't think as much as by people would kind of assume, just because Boone has been looking great in practices and Thomas hasn't looked great in practices except in this last week. So, that's kind of a big standout. I already talked about Holton Hill. That's a problem. Afadi Odenigbo looked great. And I think that he's kind of the, your backup defensive tackle of the future, which is fantastic. I didn't know that there was one on the roster. So for him to be able to fill in and perform well, not just in the 2 games that he's played, which he was all right in the Denver game and he was great in this game. But he's looked phenomenal in practice. Like, those are all good signs. Julio Johnson, blowing up 3 technique in this game, had 6 tackles and contributed to another tackle. 4 of those were run stops. Really great stuff. Weatherly finally looked good. He was kind of having an up and down camp. He didn't really show up that much in the Denver game. Looked really good in this game with Deshaun Bauer injured. That's important. I guess Mike Hughes had a problem early in the game and he got dinged for that, I think, and he just kind of fell over. But otherwise, he looked pretty good. From a problems perspective, and Cornelius Edison looked good. I already talked about that. From a problems perspective, I would say, Aviant Collins looked really poor. He's been looking great throughout camp. I thought he did all right in the Denver game, and he looked really, really poor in this game. Riley Reef looked really poor in this game, and it's a big problem because he's the starting left tackle, and he's been struggling in camp, and he looked not so great in Denver, and he looked even worse here. Tom Compton continues to escort players to the quarterback. That's a problem. Danny Isidore is fine in pass protection, and to me, that's good enough, right? Like, he is having problems as a run blocker, and in particular in this game as a second-level run blocker. But he's good enough in pass protection, and he's the guy I would pick for the left guard position once Mike Remmers comes back at right guard. Brian O'Neill looked good. Which is nice because we're kind of just expecting his kind of rawness or whatever to just show. And so far, he has had problems in the run game, but he hasn't been a problem, let's say that, in the run game. And he's looked great in pass protection, which is unique and exciting because he's gone up against some pretty talented pass rushers. All the other players I kind of want to talk about, I think, were injured. David Perry didn't have as great of a game, but he's still a really good run-stuffing nose tackle. I think he's kind of a dark horse to make the roster when nobody thought – a lot of people thought he was just kind of a camp body and there was just not enough nose tackles. And now – he's a really good run blocker. I didn't realize that he's really this good at run stuffing. He was kind of garbage at pass rushing. He won 3 out of his 13 one-on-ones that I watched as a pass rusher. It was buddy, you're a nose tackle against a center. Centers aren't meant to win one-on-ones, and you're not. Okay, cool. But he was great as a run stuffer. So that's kind of keep an eye on that and on how that evolves. Caleb Jones looked great, I thought, as a receiver, which is really important because, is there going to be a roster spot once he comes back from suspension for him? I think so, especially with the injury concerns that you have about Stacey Coley and a little bit Brandon Zylstra, who should be back, I think Monday, maybe? I don't know. We don't have a clear timeline on that. But yeah, those are my thoughts. So, Eric Wilson looked great. Sorry, I'll add that too.
Yeah.
Go Eric Wilson.
Go Eric Wilson. Let's talk some injuries because we got bit by the injury bug, and it's not pretty. I suppose the first thing that we want to mention is that Mackenzie Alexander doesn't look like the worst has happened to him.
Yeah, X-rays came back that night. They came negative, which is a good thing. There was no sign of a bone fracture of any sort, not even a hairline fracture. Great. Then they did an MRI to look at the ligaments. From what I understand, looks fine. Nothing big there. Doogie, Darren Wolfson of KSTP/1500 ESPN reports that he thinks, personally, Doogie thinks, not Mac thinks or the MRI technician or whatever. Doogie thinks it's a sprain of some sort, which if it's a high ankle sprain, which literally refers to the area of the ankle, that takes a little longer to heal, even if it's just, I think it goes from grade 1 to grade 3, where grade 3 is the worst. Where if it's grade 1 tear, it even takes a little bit of time to heal, but which is what sprains are, I think, commonly referred to as, because 2 are supposed to be partial tears, even though both 1 and 2. I don't know. I'm not a doctor, so you take it for what it is. But if it's not a high ankle sprain, that's even better. So he could be back very soon. So there's that. That's probably the best injury news we have.
It's just that everybody else seemed to have dropped off the planet. Ade Aruna, that's
I think they're still finding out. A lot of people speculate ACL based off of how his knee was moving. Mm-hmm. I am not a doctor, but it sounds like he could be one of the players that is likely to be scheduled for surgery. He's probably out for the season. We got a question about kind of, what the silver linings for that are. But for now, he was crying on the field. You could see it on the broadcast, and that really sucks. But yeah, he's probably out for the year.
Next up, Cedric Lang and Johnny Stanton.
Yeah, so Zimmer confirmed that Cedric Lang was one of the players that was going to have surgery, and I think implied a confirmation that he was going to be out for the season. He kind of flashed up and down as a guard. And so, he could have been interesting depth. He looked pretty good early on in camp too. So, out for the season on IR.
That's all right. What do we need depth at offensive line for?
Yeah, right, yeah.
Josh Andrews and Jeff Badette. Although Jeff Badette, I believe, was just a concussion.
Yeah, Badette's a concussion. And for a while, people thought Mike Boone had a concussion. He just had literally had a screw loose in his helmet. Not like an actual concussion, but like an actual screw.
Like a literal screw.
Yeah. So he got to put his helmet back on after it was fixed and got back in the game. So he clearly didn't have a concussion, but Badette has a concussion. We'll go through the concussion protocol. We'll probably miss next week, although, people, it's dependent on like how you do against your baseline tests, but there's 3 batteries of tests you have to go through, which is why a lot of people who exit games from concussions do not play the next week. That's fine. Week 3 is not the week that he was going to get a lot of snaps anyway, so they'll probably just play it safe with him and play him week 4.
Before we hit the mailbag, we want to talk a little bit about kind of players in the bubble, and this week talk about Boone versus Thomas. And we discussed a little bit during the actual discussion of the game, but let's kind of go in depth on Boone versus Thomas.
Yeah, so the real discussion here, right, obviously is, can one of them kind of slip through the waivers and make it to the practice squad? Or, sneakily, and we got a couple of questions about this, let's just address it now, should Latavius Murray be cut and you make room for both of them? I think that's a bad idea. I know that Murray costs a lot, but Murray is a really good goal line back. And unless you're super excited about CJ Ham as a goal line back, which, he produced in third and short situations, so maybe, but I'd like more than just the fullback to be that guy. You don't have one, right? Because Mike Boone is like 206 pounds. Rock Thomas, despite his name, is less rocked up, is like 196 pounds. Dalvin Cook is Dalvin Cook. I don't want any of those guys to be the goal line back, even though I think Cook is underrated in those situations. I'm fine because I don't have Dalvin Cook in any of my leagues. I'm fine with Latavius Murray being a goal line vulture. He's been good at the goal line for like the past 3 years. I think his numbers are really kind of astounding in that respect. Certainly for the past 2 years. But I want to say for the past 3 years. He's a very efficient goal line back. Maybe that's not worth $5 million, but I mean, it's like good to have touchdowns, and sometimes you just overpay players and you kind of have to accept it. I think that they should try and fit one of them onto the practice squad. So the next question then is, can they survive waivers? And I think we as fans tend to drastically overestimate the likelihood that one of the players that we like from camp that did not go drafted will survive waivers. There's going to be drafted players that other teams liked that are going to be higher priorities on the waiver wire. Now, I don't think it doesn't always happen, right? Like 4th round pick Willie Beavers, I don't think he was claimed. The last 4th round pick to be cut before him, I think it was a Browns receiver. I don't think he was claimed either. But a good chunk, not all of them, a good chunk of the waiver claims are draft picks, right? Because the reason you drafted this player instead of getting them in undrafted free agency is because you thought another team would covet them, and sometimes you're right. But not always. Sometimes it's undrafted free agents. Sometimes it's players on the 2nd or 3rd year of their rookie contract. That happens. But yeah, I would imagine that these players can slip. One of these players will slip through waiver wires and practice squad. And whoever had the smaller signing bonus, right? Because the Vikings weren't competing for their services, and I imagine that's Mike Boone. So I would say, if your goal is to keep both of them, cut Mike Boone, put him on the practice squad. If your goal is to find who the best running back is between the two of them and make them the third one and just hope the other one survives, obviously we'll have to wait and see. I think Mike Boone is actually personally a lot closer to Rock Thomas than we think, but Thomas is right now is ahead. So yeah, that's going to be a really tough decision either way, and you're always going to be nervous when you expose a player to waivers that you want to keep. But even think about this: Kyle Sloter survived waivers, right? Like the Vikings signed him to their practice squad and competed against the Broncos for his salary directly for the practice squad. And it wasn't until later that Slaughter got promoted up to the 50th, if I'm remembering that correctly. So even somebody that a bunch of people coveted based off a really, really astoundingly excellent preseason ended up going through waivers, and they were just competing over his practice squad price. And now that I think about it, I'm really sure that this is what happened. He wasn't put on the 53 right away.
No. So that is going to be it for all of that, and we are going to go into the mailbag. We will be looking into the Seahawks game in just a couple days. We'll be releasing that likely on Thursday morning, so or Thursday morning, Thursday afternoon, whenever we're able to get that recorded. So we will be looking to that then, but until then, we are going to be going right to our mailbag. And Brian Jellerson asks, just started listening to you guys not too long ago and really enjoy the show. Do you guys think, with all the injuries we're seeing to our O-line, that perhaps there's an issue with how they're training during the offseason? Or are injuries to linemen usually this common?
There's maybe a little bit of both here. I would say, if you take a look at the injuries kind of around the league, there are a lot of O-linemen that get injured. But I wouldn't say it's as often as the Vikings do. The problem is, if it was a training problem with the offensive linemen, I think we'd see a lot of similar injuries. And I don't think we do, right? And we know how Cedric Lane got injured. We have video of it, right? Because somebody rolled up onto the back of his leg, right? So that's not a training problem, unless like the Vikings are just drastically underdeveloping like ankle muscles, right? But, you know, Pat Elflein, I guess he had both an ankle and a shoulder, so that's not great for me, kind of disrupting this pattern. But Mike Remmers and some of the other linemen, they all have like a different kind of injury, right? And Mike Remmers will be back very soon. They're just kind of being careful. I wouldn't worry too much about it. It's just, I mean, I think really honestly, it's that the Vikings are a little bit unlucky. And in 2016, when they had all those injuries, some of the injuries that we think or remember that we counted are injuries that these players already had, right? Like Phil Lodeholt retiring right before the season started is because he wasn't fully healed from his old injury. It wasn't like a new injury, right? Andre Smith, I think he repeated an injury. Jake Long, the reason he was available for the Vikings was because he was perpetually injured, right? So I don't think that a lot of this has to do with the Vikings training staff. I think it's that the Vikings are a little bit unlucky, and then also offensive linemen do get injured a lot.
Next question is from Kyle Slaby, who asks, is there any group more devoted than the people who reply to Ian Rappaport and Adam Schefter tweets asking why their wife left them?
Well, they're not asking. They're just informing.
Yeah, I think the
Just
38 and
letting
7
people
people, I think they are more devoted.
Yeah, right. I think the my wife left me people, some of them are automated, right? Like there's just a bot responding to every Schefter tweet, right? With my wife left me. Some of them it's just a joke, right? They're not invested in it. If someone calls them out, they're like, yeah, well, okay. The 38 and 7 people are very invested in like telling you about the score of a game that happened like 8 months ago.
Yes, they're big believers in trying to spread awareness of that particular fact. Slaby also asks, should we just cut Kai for another player to compete for another role? He's a dead man walking at this point.
I don't think he is. What would you do if Daniel Carlson missed all of his field goals in the next game? Well, and Kai was cut. You'd be like, wow, I hope he fixes that, instead of, well, I'm glad we've got insurance for this competition that we're having. Yeah, Kai's behind in the competition. Of course he is. But I don't think being ahead in a kicker competition is enough. I think they want to just have as many. Plus, I mean, the Vikings have 40 roster spots now, right? So no reason to really clear up another one. I would wait. Forbath missed one. Kickers miss sometimes. You want to get as big a sample size as you can before you make your decision, because I don't think a 57-yard field goal in Denver, which just add 5. There's a lot of science. I'm not just saying it's not like an aphorism. There's a lot of science actually that indicates that it is easier to kick further in Denver. And you can either look at it from kind of a deductive method, which I've seen on like I think XKCD, or an inductive method, which I've seen at Brian Burke's old website, Advanced Football Analytics, both of which indicate that you basically can add 5 yards to a field goal. Which, I mean, 52 yards, still impressive. But all because he kicked one long kick that seems longer than it actually is, and then made the rest of his kicks, which were like 4 kicks. And Kai Forbath missed 1 doesn't mean that Forbath is the worst field goal kicker. It makes it much more likely that he's less valuable as a kicker, but it doesn't make it as certain as maybe we want to think based off of a sample size of like the 2 kicks that Forbath had and the 5 kicks that Carlson had. They've been neck and neck in camp. Well, Carlson's been a little ahead in camp, so fair enough. But I would wait.
Yeah, it does seem like kind of I think it's way too early to be cutting him, simply because, as you're right, if all of a sudden Carlson starts getting the yips, then what do you have? You just sit and hope that Kai Forbath is available and finds its way through waivers. Like, oh, good, Kai, let's talk. Next question is from Michael Kinland, who asks, is Arif considering changing his area of expertise to the Lingerie Football League, where they can actually hit each other now that the NFL is trying to kill itself?
The Lingerie Football League does have a concussion problem, by the way. Also, it's called the Legends Football League. They have rebranded, and I'm fine with that. Honestly, like, the players prefer it that way. It's just they wear these weird hockey. If you watched the episode of The Bachelor where they play football and Clay Harper gets injured as the only football player, and Mike, PFF Mike looks pretty good too. But if you watch that episode, they're wearing Legends Football League gear, which is why you can see their faces when they're playing football. Those aren't very good helmets at all, but people treat them like helmets. And so you've got concussion problems, and you've got like 2-way player problems. And I think it's the opposite problem with the Legends Football League, honestly.
I just want to point out that that's the most discussion we've ever had on the quote Legends Football League, and I've definitely learned something out of the
I am a football knower. That is my job. So, excuse me.
I'm not saying it's a bad thing to know it. I'm impressed, quite frankly. Delta BC Dad says, with regards to wide receiver depth, Arif seems pretty down on Wright and in favor of someone younger because we know who he is and what his ceiling is. Doesn't that cut both directions, though? If Diggs or Thielen goes down, you know where your floor is.
Well, the reason I am down on Wright is not just because we know who he is and we know what his ceiling is. It's because he's playing poorly. In camp, he's been playing extraordinarily poorly. He's had 2 good days. Well, 1 really good day and 1 like pretty good day. But I mean, 16 days of camp or whatever, and you've got like 14 bad days. That's awful, right? So he's playing poorly. He's playing worse than Stacey Coley did in the 4 days that Coley was healthy. He's playing worse than Zylstra did in the first couple of weeks of camp. And he's playing worse than Tavares King did, or Caleb Jones has. I don't think he's as good as the other receivers kind of right now. So that's not the only reason. But it also, I think, bolsters the argument to say, hey, even when he's playing at his best, this is his cap, this is his ceiling, that's it. Otherwise, I actually would agree with you, right? Like, I would agree that, and I even think that the Vikings may do this and try to find a way to keep Tavares King, even though he hasn't been that impressive, is because you don't want your depth chart to be entirely players on their 1st through 3rd years of their contract. Like, I agree that that's super not an ideal situation. And I think the Vikings may keep King as a result, or may even keep Wright just because of that fact, because otherwise it's an incredibly young receiver room. So I agree that like having a floor that you can rely on, especially when it comes to depth, is important. But I would say that Wright does not fulfill that function currently. I think he's just playing poorly. Ton of drops in camp, a ton of bad receiving technique that limits his yards after the catch, not getting open as much as he should. Other receiver stuff he's just like not good at. So that's really more of the reason.
And we kind of saw that when he had signed initially with the Vikings. We had announced, okay, well, here's Kendall Wright. here are his strengths and his weaknesses, and there are a lot of weaknesses here. So, I mean,
he was able to soak up like all the targets from an injured Chicago Bears receiving core, and he still didn't produce that much.
Yeah. So, okay, if that's what you want on your team, then that's what you want on your team. But Per asks, is Wilson showing enough to be considered a Barr replacement next season?
I wouldn't go that far, but he does seem to be playing at like a starting linebacker level. And if you kind of believe the analysis that Eric Eager at Pro Football Focus is doing about wins above replacement, which, side note, we should be doing a better job talking about PFF, not just because I'm like this insane defender who's always like, yay, PFF, because, I'll criticize them when they get things wrong. But PFF's 0 to 100 grades do not represent the data that they use to come to these conclusions. The data that they use to come to these conclusions has been better than Vegas when they've personally tested out the model. Now, obviously, I have to trust them when they tell me that. But I trust Eric. We're friends. So to the extent that you trust my judgment, trust me when I say that the player model that they've constructed is incredible. It's very good. And it's very good at determining which positions matter the most. And in their player model, linebackers just kind of don't matter. And the league is kind of moving in that direction too, or has moved in that direction, right? Like edge defenders get paid. The top edge defender gets paid more than twice the amount as the top off-ball linebacker, right? So maybe the fact that Eric Wilson is playing at a starting level or could be as good as a starter, even though he can't quite reach Anthony Barr's potential, which he kind of realized in the 2015 season as just this incredible linebacker. Yeah, maybe, that's worth the cost savings and all that. Personally, I think that Barr is such a unique athlete and just makes that defense operate, especially on third down, in a unique way that a lot of linebackers, including Eric Wilson, can't, that I'd rather just keep Anthony Barr and have Eric Wilson as kind of one of the better depth linebackers that are available in the league.
Next question is from Dan, who says, any love for the idea of trading Everson Griffin for some O-line help?
No. I mean, that's a unique, I think, approach, right? Because everybody's talking about trading Mack or trading Waynes or trading Barr, right? People have talked about those three players in terms of trading for an offensive lineman. And those, I think, make sense. I would say the defensive end depth is good, but not great, right? We're not in a situation where we've got great depth like at the cornerback room, or you've got like an iffy contract situation like with Anthony Barr where you don't know how long you can keep him. It's really just a question of you've got like good depth and you immediately will not have good depth. And we saw that, right? When Everson Griffin wasn't able to play in this game, Brian Robinson played as a starting defensive end, and I thought he played poorly. Which he's a veteran. You don't want to talk about him like that, but he's clearly kind of on his last legs, and I don't think he played very well. He didn't play like he did even last year, right? And then behind that, they lost Deshaun Bauer to injury, and so they had to play Stephen Weatherly, who's been having an up and down camp. Obviously, he had a good game, but then you don't have anything behind that, so your depth becomes Brian Robinson and Stephon Weatherly, and you might have to start Deshaun Bauer, which that does not sound fun at all. So I think you'd be kind of moving yourself backwards. Plus, to reference the PFF conversation, edge rushers are way more important than guards. So no, I guess.
Absolutely not. Also, and although it's just the preseason, any thoughts on DeFilippo and his offense?
I think we're too preseason-y to really get a good read on it. I really wanted to see kind of the way the red zone plays would be designed. And we got 2 running back dives in the first game and a touchdown pass that, wasn't amazing or anything like that, but was fine. Beyond that, not a ton. It seems like it's more wide open offense. I'm always in favor of that. It seems like that's kind of better enabled the running game. That's good. But I'm not really going to dig into schematics or tendencies of DeFilippo's offense until we get a couple of games into the season. We get to see game planning. We get to see tendency breaking. We get to compare kind of what he did here with what he did with the Browns, with a little bit of what was happening in Philadelphia, and all that. So I would kind of hold back, but yeah, it seems cool.
Bill Botke asks, could certain injuries be, quote, a blessing in disguise for the players? Many of the hurt Vikings might not be good enough to make any practice squad, like Hercules or Ade Aruna. On injured reserve, they will get time to develop skills, put on weight, etc. Assuming they recover from their injury, might they be in better position to make some team next year rather than this year?
Yeah, this is always a really difficult conversation to have because, I mean, we saw like Ade Aruna cry, like on the field. It's a very emotional moment, right? And an injury could be career threatening, not just season threatening, right? And so it's like very scary. But assuming that they're on a standard recovery path where they have the ability to come back within a year and go to training camp and do rehab and all that, Ade Aruna may be in a better position now than he was before because he doesn't have to worry about getting cut. He could, of course, negotiate an injury settlement with the Vikings and try to sign with someone else. I would say that that's a mistake. If the Vikings might just want to put him on IR, that'll put him on a recovery path. And he's got a lot of issues he has to clean up. Technically, he's got a lot of stuff that he's got to add to his arsenal. From a reaction time standpoint, he's got to, I don't know if you can, but he's got to find a way to improve his reaction time or his snap timing. His explosiveness has not really shown up on the field. And so I don't think he would have made the roster. And now we're in a position where we have this kind of like difficult conversation where we're like, maybe it was good for him, which is always like a bad thing to feel like you're saying. But it does give him another year of salary, and it does allow him to kind of develop some of the stuff that he couldn't develop when his rehab is over, which, you know, obviously you have to come back from below zero, right? You start in the negatives, work your way up to zero, and then work your way up a little bit more. But you get to rehab in an NFL facility, and you get your development and your training done by NFL trainers. So yeah, there's a silver lining, but it's not as if you want to get injured, right? Because like, given that you're injured, there's a high chance that it's career threatening. And also, you don't want the injury prone label attached to you. Like when the Vikings make this decision next year, they'll consider how injured you were last year, because they don't want players that have a high, or they are less likely to want players that have a high likelihood of injury. So there's all that to keep in mind, and it does feel callous to say it, but I think ultimately you're kind of right with someone like Ade Aruna, where I don't think he was playing well enough to make a practice squad. And now he gets the chance to, after he rehabs, potentially train with NFL certified people for the things that he needs to train towards.
So it could work out for him anyway. Zen Cupid asks, who calls a better preseason game for the Vikings? Paul Allen / Bursich or Mayock?
It really depends on what you're looking for. If you want to be excited by the game, I think it's PA and Bursich. You want to like hear all these like random tidbits, right? Stuff you've learned in like production meetings and stories about the players, and you know, maybe they'll speculate, and the speculation is grounded in like the weird special relationship the PA has with the team, and he could let something slip or kind of slip, and that's all like fun, right? That has its own fun. PA is fully bought into his shtick, right? And so, you know, he'll get super excited about some plays and talk over Bursich. And sometimes, you know, Bursich will attempt to interject in the wrong moments, right? And try to talk over PA. I think in those iconic moments that we remember, PA's calls have been the best, right? Adrian Peterson's "He's Loose," everyone's going to remember that. The PA's call, the Minneapolis Miracle, I think was better than anyone else's, and that includes Kevin Harlan at Westwood. A lot of really great stuff, right? But if you kind of like, if you're interested in learning about sort of the technical aspects of the players, their college history, especially the players at the bottom of the roster, Mayock is great for that. And he's like a preseason specialty kind of guy, where he's a lot better in the preseason than he is in the regular season, although I actually do kind of like him in the regular season. But he does a really good job of like informing you about Jonathan Wynn, like the 7th string defensive end. Like, oh, you know, he's this defensive end out of Vanderbilt. He's 256 pounds. He's got to add weight. You know, he's got to, you know, make sure that he can stand up to the game, stand up to the run game and stuff like that. You know, he had like this GPA or whatever, like Mayock stuff, right? So it really depends on what you're looking for.
I think it really depends on which, going by that criteria, it really depends on which week of the season that you're on. I think weeks 1 and 2 would probably be better for Mayock if you were looking for more of like a history behind the players that are on the field. Meanwhile, 3 and 4, or at least 3, would probably be better for for Bursic and Paul Allen.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like Mayock's not important for you to learn about like Kyle Rudolph, right? Like he's not going to tell you anything about Kyle Rudolph that's going to give you more information on how well Kyle Rudolph is going to potentially do or what he needs to work on or whatever, right? Like you either know these things or you know who Kyle Rudolph is and you don't care, right? Whereas PA is going to be like, wow, touchdown, right? Like that's cool. And then he can tell you a story about, you know, Kyle Rudolph's house, which previously had Michael Floyd in it, right? And Kyle Rudolph's new kid and all that. And that's fun because it's a player that you know and you already like. Mayock is actually built for week 4, right? Because starters don't even play week 4. And so now you get to learn about like, oh, Peter Pujols, Holy Cross, hasn't taken any snaps in the preseason. Let me tell you about his entire college history. And you're like, oh yeah, cool. Okay.
Like, that's something I didn't know I needed.
Yeah. For me personally, it's better to have Mayock because I'm writing about these players. And it's less important for the style of writing that I do to know that like, Rudolph has another kid on the way or something, right? Like I can't put that into like my after game report. Like, and we learned, you know.
I mean, you could put it in as like a reason why he may not have done well. Well, as was evidenced or as was announced in the broadcast, he is expecting another child that might have been a distraction on the field, and as we know, distractions are killer.
Yeah, distractions are killer. Link to the Chris Chloe Deadspin article.
Exactly. Joe Justice asks, we all know the football gods are going to screw us over, but I don't think it's going to be offensive line injuries because that happened a couple of years ago. What sort of new form of suffering are the football gods going to impose on us this year?
No, that's the wrong way to think about it. Yeah, they delight in crafting new methods of suffering, but I think they take a special pleasure in reopening old wounds. I mean, wide left, right? Like... Mm-hmm. Oh, wow, he missed a kick in the playoffs after, like, are you serious? Like, that, I mean, that's this, and we've seen multiple years with offensive line injuries, and so we get to dip back into that well. Also, I don't know, like, what new thing? Actually, I shouldn't ask that question.
I think that's opening Pandora's box. Yeah. I mean, Journey will play the concert. People will sit through the new stuff, but you kind of want to hear the classics.
Yeah.
So, you know, the don't stop believing in this particular instance is going to be our offensive line.
Yeah.
Wonder what's going to be the
wheel in the sky.
Wheel in the sky.
Wheel in the sky is a kicker, I think.
I can see that.
Separate ways is a late game backbreaking interception.
Ooh, that was totally avoidable.
Yeah.
100% avoidable. City by the Bay.
That I think has to be cornerback injuries, right? Because it's been a while since that's been a big problem. Like when they were signing Benny Sapp off the street and stuff. Benny Sapp III, student athlete at the University of Minnesota. Yeah. But yeah, so I think
And open arms is clearly going to be just that overthrow that was just like an entire helmet over the receiver.
Right.
Side note, if you've ever actually had a chance to see Journey, it's not a terrible concert, and the guy who sings in place of Steve Perry is the most energetic Filipino man that you will ever see in your life.
Yeah, his name's like Alfred or Fred Pineda or something like that, and he was part of like a Journey. This is not stuff we prepped for the show.
No. Just want to point this out. On our show notes, that says nothing about Journey.
Yeah, he's like, so there's a bunch of Journey cover bands in the Philippines, and he had like, I think may have won like a couple of contests, like a Journey cover band specific contests.
Yeah.
And, you know, they were looking for, you know, a lead singer so that they could tour. And his first performance after they selected him was astounding. It's on YouTube. I mean, it sounds the exact same. It's incredible.
No, he is quite the sight to see. It's I ended up going because I had free tickets, and the girl that I was attempting to date wanted to go to Journey. Like, absolutely, that sounds like a wonderful idea. Let's go do that.
That's great. Yeah. Wow. Cool. Let's keep dating. This is great.
There's free concert tickets in it. Sure. Like, I think Asia was the band that opened, and that was 30 minutes of waiting for Heat of the Moment. That's all that was. About 30 minutes of waiting for Heat of the Moment. You guys can play your little like jazz fusion thing. We just want to clap along to Heat of the Moment.
That's great.
Zach via email, and this is probably my favorite question of the mailbag this week. Zach via email. I want to pick your brain about player medical information. I'm encouraged to ask this question by my wife, who has a vehemently negative reaction every time a player's injury / medical information is revealed in sports news. For reasons you can guess, she's not much of a sports fan. In normal life, our medical information is so private that it can be difficult to even get good details about our own family members' medical concerns. So why are sports players, and NFL players in particular, subject to their medical information being released to the public? Is this an unwritten rule or something players sign off on when they sign their contracts? And if so, why is this legal?
So HIPAA laws do not apply to NFL teams. So HIPAA are the medical privacy laws, and I'm sure I'm going to get a lawyer or a doctor emailing the show correcting something I'm about to say. I totally encourage you to do that. But from what I understand, HIPAA laws don't apply to medical teams. They apply to like healthcare providers and insurers, I think. But they do not apply to NFL teams, even though NFL teams do provide healthcare coverage. I know it's weird, and I think this is an area of law, from what I know, please correct me, that hasn't been fully tested in courts or anything like that. But it's not like a player is going to sue the NFL over this. And I've also been told, but I did a little bit of quick research before the show, that players sign HIPAA waivers. I haven't actually seen that when I re-researched this. So I don't know if that's the case, but that's also something to consider. If you get access to medical information, you are not subject to HIPAA law. You might be subject to like another law, like receiving stolen goods or whatever, right? But like, you're not subject to HIPAA laws because you're not the medical provider. You've just like, this is why Adam Schefter wasn't liable when he tweeted out like JPP's medical chart, which is still super weird.
That still seems super illegal even after the fact.
Right.
Like,
yeah, and it turns out like it wasn't, but like, why not?
Like, why isn't there a law about this?
And the reason the NFL does this is because people want to know. That's the only reason, right? It affects gambling lines, and this is actually the original reason they did this. Not because the NFL supports sports gambling, perish the thought. It was more that gamblers would game the system because they had unique access to player injury information. So they would know beforehand, which players were injured going into the game, which ones, wouldn't be ready to play and all that. Then they would lay down these huge lines knowing that the starting quarterback wasn't going to play. Vegas or whichever bookie they were laying lines with at the time. I don't even know if I'm using the correct betting terminology. Excuse me. But whoever set the line maybe wasn't aware or whatever, and they put a big amount of money, knowing that the starting quarterback wasn't going to play or something like that, and then they win big, and so they universalized access to information that only a couple of people had access to and were acting on it. So that's kind of the original reason it went out there, and also now I just gave you the reason that it's probably protected. Yeah, it's weird. You're right.
It is an odd thing that you don't hear about in any other aspect of life other than professional sports. Like, you don't hear, at work that somebody, is on the shelf, and this is the specific reason, and from the doctor, this is what is to be expected.
Yeah, they've got a grade 2 ACL and a grade 3 PCL tear. They're going to be out 6 to 8 months. You're like, oh, I didn't really care to know that about Jim, but
boy, that's
cool.
really gonna change the way that we deliver the mail around here. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, Jim, I guess you can't twist on that foot for the next 8 months. So,
Our
like
training
always,
staff.
sit in this chair like you did before, and sort the mail. Cool. Okay, excellent.
HVAC Repairman asks, is the reason that Arif hates the Egan Camp location because he doesn't get to crock pot out of some cheap hotel room? Because this is keeping me up at night. You know, I had actually stated that was probably one of the reasons that was the problem, is that you weren't getting enough crock pot action as a result of all of this. Because you do have a love of cheap hotel rooms.
I don't. Come on, man. That's not.
With terrible Wi-Fi. Just the worst internet connections. If you want to listen to some of the earlier editions of the training camp shows,
please do not.
Year 1 and Year 2 in the July and August shows, boy, there are some winners as far as the connection goes there. It's
absolutely do not do this thing.
It's astounding, really. It's leaps and bounds.
I mean, there was a special, like, moment coming back to the hotel room. It smells just like beef. Phenomenal. When you get a crock pot going for like 8 hours on the super like tough cut of beef that you've prepped beforehand, using like a paring knife that you brought down, and you know, some paper towels that you're using on top of something, so you've got a cutting board, kind of. Yeah, phenomenal. I loved it. Now I eat food that other people prepare, and that's cool too.
I'm just envisioning the other people in the hotel just what is that smell of beef? What is being cured around here? I don't understand.
That was part of the appeal for me, honestly.
Well, yeah, there's a certain amount of just considering the amount of trolling that happens on Twitter, I assume like, trolling people in real life when you're not even around is like a highlight of your like existence.
Right. And like in my head, I like to think that it's positive trolling, because when you smell food this good, you don't want to have bad food. You want to have good food. So I encouraged people to treat themselves.
And this is welcome. And this is why The Athletic hired you.
Exactly.
Don from Ohio asks, James and Arif are at the zoo. While looking down at the tigers, you are pushed into the display by Kyle Siegel.
Wait, both of us?
Yes.
Okay.
And apparently he only needed one hand to push me down. The beef jerky that James snuck in fell in between you two. That beef jerky would hold the tiger over enough for both of you to escape. So which one of you feeds it?
Wait, it would hold the tiger enough for both of us to escape?
Yes. So it would.
So it's really just a question of who has the rapid reaction skills in response to physical danger, right?
I think that's accurate. I think speed and reaction time are the two things that we're going to be looking at here.
This is something I pride myself on. My ability to act in a crisis in response to physical danger. Now, that is that doesn't mean I'm physically capable, right? Like we have video evidence that I'm not.
No.
But throughout my life, I've been put into a lot of situations. Maybe some of it self-induced. I will not disclose.
A lot of it self-induced.
Will not disclose. And I've had to react quickly with a calm head to emergency situations. And I have done an excellent job of reacting. That's why I'm alive, despite the insane stuff that I've found myself dealing with. So, you know, like when... Like, you know, for example, a dog gets off their leash and they chase, you know, a group of people. Some people freeze. Some people run away. I run away. Other people get eaten by a dog. Well, okay, so...
I think if you're going to say that some people get eaten by a dog, people are going to think that was something that literally happened to you.
Okay, so that entire story happened except for the eating part. But someone did get bit by a, like...
Well, by a dog, yes. It was just the eaten part that, you know... Eaten implies...
I'm a writer. I will embellish certain
eaten by
truths.
a dog implies digestion. I'm throwing that out there.
You're right. I'm just saying I embellished a little bit. Okay, so I'm a field manager for a canvassing organization, and the three of us are, walking through a neighborhood because it's our job, asking people for money, even though we don't get to keep any of that money. It was a bad job. And
now you get to keep the money you ask for.
Right, exactly. Indirectly. But yes, I benefit from asking for money this time. And a lot of times we would encounter situations where, say, owners were either intentionally careless or unintentionally careless with their pets who were very aggressive, and they would chase after us. Except chase implies that two parties are moving, and I was always the party that was moving, even the first time I encountered a dog. Now, I did check to see if I was responsible for any injuries sustained by pets to any of my crew, because I was the manager of a crew, and I wasn't. But that didn't stop me from helping these people when they were in danger, because I would run back and, try to move them out of the way. They're bigger than me usually because I'm a small person. But, I'd pull on their shirt and get them to move and stuff like that. So I would say I react very well to physical danger and protests. I'm sure people aren't surprised that I go to protests. When cops show up, I do a very good job of figuring out what to do super fast. I've never been arrested. I've never had to breathe in tear gas or anything like that.
I like how you bring that up because I've brought it up on the show that I have, but in a completely indirect way.
Well, yeah, that's not like you weren't causing trouble.
I was just eating a sandwich.
You were just there.
I was just eating a sandwich. I didn't want to be gassed.
Yeah, idiot. If I knew the beef jerky would help both of us, yeah, I would do it. But if I didn't know, I'd run to the edge of the. Sorry, James.
No, see, here's how I envision it going down. Is that we're both knocked in, and because there is less mass to you, and you are in much better shape than I am, and I'm also going to say younger than I am, just because you are.
Well, I am.
I envision that you will pop up to your feet first, and all you really need to do is just outrun the fat guy, and you're probably going to end up being safe. So and I envision myself slowly kind of getting up and dusting myself off, knowing where I am, but while I have a little bit of speed, I'm not going to be able to run nearly.
But dusting yourself off,
just in that whole I've fallen into the pit. Okay.
Right. No, I get it. You're getting up and acquainting yourself with the world. I get it. But I just like the idea of you getting up. You're fully aware of the situation, and you notice some dirt on your knee, and you're like, "Hold exactly. on, I gotta. This is unsightly."
I got. Hold on. Let me get the. Let me get the shoulder. All right, now we're good. All right, let's focus on the task at hand. Oh, it just happens to say on this wrapper, this package for the jerky that will assist in escapes from tiger cages. Awesome.
Wow, I'm glad they sell this at the zoo.
That's
great.
That's so awesome. Here's my thing. I actually take a medication that causes my any sort of spikes in blood pressure to just even out immediately, which feels a bit like an endorphin, a bit like of a high. So all of a sudden it's just riding high, and then it feels like the medication kicks in. It's like doom. It's like, oh, it's switched gears. Okay, it's. There's no nervousness at all. It actually works a bit with anxiety stuff. So as a result of the blood pressure medication, I can be in incredibly stressful situations like that and not flinch. So and it wouldn't be until afterwards where I'm holding my chest going, holy crap, that was the dumbest thing I've ever been a part of. That was the stupidest. Why the hell did that? I'd be okay at that moment. It's actually a drug that they don't allow you to take if you're in a professional dart tournament because the stress of
that's incredible. That makes sense.
Yeah, so the stress or whatever, anxiety.
You're on PED. I wouldn't stand a chance then. You're on PEDs.
Exactly. So I would be able to do it.
Okay.
I feel like you should because I have a kid, but I
believe your chemical advantage over my 8 anecdotes of me doing stuff.
I'm on PEDs, damn it.
Yeah. But yeah, I may be more physically capable than you. So yeah, I guess it's still me.
Yeah. Mustard Fat asks, is 29 too old to be ordering chicken fingers whenever you go out to eat?
No, those are just smaller chicken tenders, right?
Yeah.
Unless we're talking about like the Burger King, like chicken fries type. If those are chicken fingers, then yes. But if it's just chicken tenders that are smaller, yeah, whatever.
I mean, if it's like a sit-down restaurant or whatever, like I'm getting the chicken fingers. It'd be different if you were like getting the chicken fingers at like a Mexican restaurant or something. So like,
yeah, well, yeah.
Like that ends up being.
Let me see the kids menu. This carne asada looks fine. This enchilada, okay. Let me see the kids menu.
Exactly.
Cheeseburgers and chicken fries.
Like I get the chicken fingers and the potato wedges at the big Fargo gas station on the way up to Grand Forks whenever I come through, because the chicken fingers there are disturbingly good. Like I have no issue with you doing that. Oh,
that's like the fried chicken at the Bobby and Steve's on like Washington by the West Bank, University of Minnesota.
Yes.
Disturbingly good.
There's a couple of it's like I don't understand why like you people are clearly astronauts who have quit your positions of the space program in order to make chicken fingers more delicious. While I appreciate your efforts, I do not understand your career goals.
Yeah, right.
Finally, Austin Medizian asks, is Lego Batman better than Batman vs. Superman or a lot better?
It's a lot better. That's not. Come on.
Lego Batman is maybe one of. I think Lego Batman is actually better than the original like Lego movie. But Lego Batman was just so. It was funny on like 10 levels. Like,
yeah, Lego Batman is a top 3 Batman movie. Like The Dark Knight's first, right?
I could. Yeah. Okay.
And then was it the Jack Nicholson one? It's probably
the first one. Yep.
Yeah. I just called it the Jack Nicholson one instead of like the George Keaton one. Michael Keaton one.
Michael.
And then probably Lego Batman.
It references every single movie, including the original.
It's just incredible.
It was so
funny.
I ended up watching that in the theater just because I had heard so many good things about it. So, okay, go out and see it. I didn't even bring the kid. I just went myself and watched it and laughed my butt off. So, no, that is surprisingly... And the running joke of the Michael Jackson song throughout it is just so good with Man in the Mirror.
Oh, actually, you know what? I'm going to say it's fourth to the Batman animated series Mr. Freeze movie. But it's, yeah.
Phantasm, I think, was better than Mr. Freeze.
Heart of Ice, that's it.
Yeah.
Really? Okay, so that's a very common opinion, and that's fine. You're probably right, because critics agree with you. But I loved Heart of Ice.
You might have the opinion of the critics, but not this critic.
Yeah, but not me, cartoon liker. Okay, fine. Well, yeah, but let's say the animated series is like its own like kind of blob where you just include all those movies. So it's probably fourth to that, but maybe not. Like it's really good.
Yeah. So that's going to be it for this edition of the show. We went a little long on this one, but we will be coming back later this week to talk about the game versus the Seahawks. And because it's week 3 and the Vikings are going to be treating it more like a regular season game, we're going to be treating this more like a regular season week. So we're going to come back a little later this week with a discussion on a preview of the Seahawks game. It'll probably be a much shorter episode, but we hope to get a guest and everything set up for that. So hope to see you then. Arif, let's plug The Athletic one more time.
Yeah, let's absolutely do that. So if you missed the beginning of the show for some reason, I've joined The Athletic. I'm super excited about it. It's a huge step forward in getting a bigger audience, having more resources to be able to cover games better, getting more access to the team, and stuff like that. And it would be really great if you continue to read my work over at The Athletic Minnesota. So you can actually follow them on Twitter at The Athletic MIN. And they'll be promoting my pieces as well as the pieces of John Krasinski and Chad Graff, who both have written excellent stuff. Covered that at the top of the show. And you can get a 30% off an Athletic subscription by going to theathletic.com/Vikings expansion. Which, it's the expansion of their Vikings team, not like an expansion of the Minnesota. You get it. I don't know why I clarified.
Do we? Do we get it?
Yeah, right. I'm super stoked. I hope that you're super stoked. If you're not, tough.
You're not giving back the money.
Yeah, right. Like, great. But head over to the Athletic to read all my stuff, to read all Chad's stuff, to read all John's stuff, and that's just people covering the Vikings. There's people covering every Minnesota sport. There's people covering every team and every major sport. They've also got Sloan Martin covering the Lynx. She's fantastic. I definitely. Oh, and then Russo over at the Wild. If you're a Wild fan, you know who he is. So yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, very, very good news for Vikings fans. This is really cool. So again, congratulations to Arif. That is going to be it for this show. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening, and remember to tweet that. And we will see you later this week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and co-host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can also be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.
And we're out.
Cool.
Like as the Vikings are treating this like a regular season, so are we. Right. We're gonna go with that.
Yeah, why not?